Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor and distinct pleasure to introduce a man who was indicted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame as well as the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but he also won the 2007 Nate Fleischer Award for excellence in boxing journalism, the highest honor bestowed by the Boxing Writers Association of America, the man that led the charge for combat sports at Yahoo Sports for 17 long years is in he's one of the greatest combat sports journalists of all time, the writer for the fighter, Kevin Iole. Kevin, how are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
No, it's just brother, thank you for being here. This is an absolute dream for me. As a matter of fact, I had to have Taylor slap me on top of the head moments before you arrived to remind me I'm not in a dream state, sir.
Well, I appreciate it. No, it's great to be on with you guys, and hopefully, we got a good interview coming up.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm going to dive right into the questions, sir. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready to roll. Let's go.
Let's go. Kevin, what are the top three hardest challenges you've had to overcome in your life, sir?
Whoa, you starting with the hard ones, huh?
Well, yes, sir. I'm diving right into it.
The hardest challenges I over, I guess number one was I came from modest background. Neither my mom nor dad attended college. And so, when I was a kid, I always knew I was going to college because that's what mom and dad had said, but they didn't know anything about it, right? Like, now I see parents taking their kids and they go on school visits and they do all this. Like, that wasn't a thing when I was going to college. And mom and dad did not, I had a great family and everything was good. But like when you think about that from just getting ready to go to college and what am I going to do? When I, when I said to my guidance counselor that I wanted to be in journalism, he says, "Why?" And I said, "Well, this is the reason why." And he's like, "Pfft." And he would like, "Change your mind." Like, so, I didn't have a lot of support as I was going through high school to college in terms of, picking the right college, doing the right thing, right? So I did a lot of that on my own as a guy who didn't know. So I would think, like that would be number one, right? Just, your education is everything. And like, I didn't have all that. But I was fortunate because I went to a great journalism school. I got a very good journalism education, and I think it really helped me to become the journalist that I did.
Man, man, you talk about you talk about a little bit of waking up, bud. You know what I mean? Try that on. Try that on. Dude, that's some Mr. Iole wisdom right there, brother.
Sure, man.
Man, let me ask you, what are your top three proudest moments in life, Kev?
Well, like, see, let's talk. I guess from a professional standpoint, getting elected to the Boxing Hall of Fame, right? It was something that I never expected. What I thought I had a chance. I figured it was a pretty good chance that I would get nominated, and I was nominated for two times. So I wasn't a first ballot Hall of Famer. I was a second ballot Hall of Famer. And I never thought I would get elected, right? I thought the best I could hope for was to be nominated. So when I got nominated last year, I was really satisfied because, it's saying, hey, there's a lot of people that cover this sport and only a few that get on the ballot. So for me to be able to say, hey, I got nominated to be in the Boxing Hall of Fame was amazing. But then when I got the call that you're actually in, it was like, oh my God. So from a professional standpoint, I think that would be, one. Number two was, I was on what I would call the original staff at Yahoo, Dan Wetzel, myself, Adrian Wojnarowski, Charles Robinson. And there wasn't even any sports when I started, right? And we got, Dan Wetzel had been there a long time, but nobody else. And Dave Morgan came in and he hired me and he said, start covering boxing. And I said, well, what about MMA? And I kind of talked him into MMA, right? We didn't have MMA on the budget. It was going to be, I was going to be a boxing writer there, but I convinced him to do MMA. And so I think getting that going was also, a very proud thing. And I guess, the last thing I'll say was just, I don't think anybody knows it until they're in the position that we're in when you're on deadline at a major event, right? So, especially at Yahoo, because here's what would happen. I would be sitting in a fight, whether it would be UFC fight or a boxing match, and as soon as the fight was over, I had to write a story and have it turned in roughly 5 minutes.
Dang.
And that would be a story that would be the most read because as soon as I wrote it, they posted it. I'm not getting editing. And, that's one of the great things of working at a big company like Yahoo or ESPN. You have a lot of editors and people read it, right? But in that particular case, the story that everybody wants to see is who won the fight, and they want to see it right away. So all the traffic comes swarming in. So I'm sitting there night after night after night on deadline writing these stories and people, imagine writing a 400 or 500 word story in 5 minutes, and then turning around and having to write another story that would be your regular story. But most people would see the story you wrote fastest, which was more of it was my worst work, right? Because I'm doing it, boom, 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 boom. The fight ends, and I'm sitting down and I'm typing like that. So I'm proud. That's something that people who are in journalism and who worked on deadline understand. People who didn't do that, they don't really have a clue how that worked.
No doubt. No, not to mention it'd probably be about 2 a.m., 1:30, 2 a.m. You've just sat through 6 hours of freaking fights. You're probably mentally exhausted trying to remember all this stuff, man. I mean, gosh, man.
It was easy from the one standpoint because the quick story was always going to be about the main or the co-main event, and so that had just happened. But there's a lot of stuff like sometimes I would get stuff on Twitter and you would just laugh. People don't understand. They're watching us and they'll say, "Oh, you're not watching the fight." Well, I have a cameraman standing right in front of me because I'm like 10 feet from the octagon. And if the action is right in front of us, the cameraman comes over. So now in front of my face, I got some guy's butt, right? So now I got to look at the big screen to be able to see what's happening. And sometimes, if they're on the other side of the ring and the referee's there, you don't see what punch landed, right? You see a punch landed, you see the guy go down, and now I got to start writing. And I'm not 100% certain, okay, what happened, right?
No
And,
doubt.
people get all bent out of shape, oh, you're not even watching the fight. You were looking in the stands. No, I was watching the big screen because there was a cameraman standing right in front of me. So it's like kind of funny, like, when you see it from our perspective and you understand what's going on relative to the perspective of somebody who's watching us on TV and they're sitting at home.
No doubt. Dude, yeah. No, I have heard that critique a million times, and my take on it is like, dude, you don't know what he's doing, man. He's the professional. Leave him alone. Would you go tell a fireman how to put out the fire? Would you do that? No, so shut up. You know what I mean?
Like I don't mind people having opinions, right? But I want them to be open-minded. So, and they can certainly disagree with my opinion, and they can even say, "Hey, your writing sucks. I think you're terrible." That's fair. I don't have a problem with that. But understand the process, right? And I had, people reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Hey, I want to do what you do. And so I would say, okay, well, here's kind of what I do on a daily basis, and I'd say, write something for me. Watch the fights on Saturday night, and as soon as the fight's over, send me a story and have it to me in 10 minutes. And they couldn't do it. And, it was like, okay, now do you see what's going on? Or if they did it, not very good.
Yeah,
And, so I'm not boasting because it was part of my job, but I'm just making the point that sometimes, be kind to the person on the other end because you're not really sure what's going on all the time.
correct. Correct. Well, look, this next question I got is going to lighten the mood a little bit. It's not so much a serious one. Uh, we know you love hitting the greens, Kevin. So, if you could golf with any celebrity, dead or alive, who would it be? And also, part two to that question, what other MMA journalist or combat sports journalist would you like to golf against with a celebrity as well?
Well, let's see. I guess, does J Lo play golf? So, so, you know, if J Lo plays, and that's my answer.
Let's
We'll go
go.
out, and I want to see J Lo squatting down to read a putt. So that would
Let's
be, kind of
go.
That's a great answer.
that would be my thing there. So I would say J Lo. As far as playing with, I played with a lot of the other MMA writer. A good friend of mine who lives here in Vegas, and I've known him for 15 years or so, and he plays golf. That I haven't had a chance to play with is Brett Okamoto. So from
Oh,
ESPN. And so I guess I would say Brett, because I haven't played with Brett. I've played with a lot of guys, but I haven't played with Brett. So Brett would be a guy that I think I would point out.
no doubt. Yeah. Brett Okamoto. Is it Okamoto or Akamoto? People say
Okamoto.
Okamoto. Okay. Because you hear it said so many different ways. And even live on the telecast, you hear them say Akamoto. And
Hmm.
it's just like, come on, guys. Let's just get the name right,
Right.
brother. No, Brett Okamoto is goated. We love listening to that guy. I mean, you talk about a guy that's sharp, on point, and has some of the best questions to ask these guys right off the rip, too. That's going to be hard to do,
For sure.
you know?
Yeah, Brett's really good, and he worked at the Las Vegas Sun here in Las Vegas before he went to ESPN. And I always was a fan of Brett's, and I thought, this guy is going to be, really good someday. It was funny at that point in the Las Vegas Sun's history, the Las Vegas Sun, was not a daily paper. They were folded into the Las Vegas Review Journal paper. And so they had one section, right? So it was an 8-page, the entire newspaper. And Jesse Granger, who now is a hockey writer at the Athletic, came from that paper, and Brett Okamoto came from that paper, and some other really good journalists. So they had a lot of really good journalists there. But from a fight standpoint, Brett, I always knew Brett was going to do well.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, Gagey put a whooping on Brett and his brother last week. Did you see that?
No, I missed
On the
that.
greens. Yeah, on the greens, man. Apparently put a during fight week while cutting weight.
There you go.
Yeah.
Brett, Brett can hit it a long way, but he's not too straight, from what I understand. So that might be a problem there.
Shots fired. Mr. Kevin, you might get that golf match a little quicker than you think, brother. If Brett hears this, it might be on. Yeah. No, all right. Let's jump back into some deep stuff. We got into some fun stuff. Let's get into some deep stuff, brother. Who were some of your most valuable mentors or people you looked up to as a young man?
Well, when I was a kid, a lot of the sports writers in Pittsburgh, where I grew up, were people that I looked up to. Phil Music was one, Bob Smizek. But the guy that I always was my favorite writer was Jim Murray. At the LA Times. And Jim Murray's column was syndicated nationally back in those days, so it ran in a lot of different papers. He worked for the LA Times, but his column, went everywhere. And, to me, the greatest sports writer of all time. Jim Murray would be, when I sat next to him at a fight, the Tyson Holyfield, the bite fight. And it was just like I'm sitting next to Babe Ruth. If you're a baseball fan, you're sitting next to the GOAT, right? And I'm sitting right next to Jim Murray. Was incredible, and he wrote an amazing story that night. At that point in his life, he was legally blind, and he still, if you Google his story, on Tyson Holyfield. It was just an incredible story. Jerry Eisenberg is one of the great writers of all time, too. He's still working at 94, 95 years old, and he lives in Southern Nevada here, and I see him every now and then, and he was a great help to me. The late Michael Katz, boxing Hall of Famer, he was at the New
Shoo.
York Times and the New York Daily News, and Michael Katz was just, phenomenal and really helped me. And then I think the other one that I would have to mention, would be Ron Borges of the Boston Globe.
No doubt. Man, that's crazy because you're kind of the Jim Murray to us, man. You know what I mean? That's crazy how that works, dude. The evolutionary cog. You
I
know what I mean?
I am no Jim Murray, believe me.
Oh, I'm not trying to put labels on nothing. I ain't trying to put labels on nothing. Shout out to Jim Murray, by the way. Legend. Absolute diamond of a writer, by the way.
Yeah,
And
he's
we
the
will
best
look.
ever. Not even close.
What did I say before he came on? I said he's going to talk about that fight, the Tyson and Holyfield fight. So we will, in fact, look up that article that you told us to as soon as we get off this interview. We
Yeah,
will.
it's a great piece, right? And he has a lot of books out of his collection of his columns, but you have to think of that column. He was legally blind, and there was chaos. I could tell you stories for hours about that night. A lot of nutty things that I went through that night that was crazy. That you're thinking I'm a boxing writer and I'm doing this. And there was gunshots in the casino, or reports of gunshots in the casino, and I ran up into the casino, and I mean, all kind of nuttiness going on. There were basketball players turning over blackjack tables, and it was a crazy night. And Jim Murray was legally blind, and all hell was breaking loose. And he wrote this unbelievable article when you read it.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. We're going to check that out, man. So let me ask you this. If you could go back in time and change one minute thing, what would it be, if anything at all?
I don't think I would change anything because my journey made me who I am, right? I covered a lot of different things. Like one of the things that I tell a lot of would-be journalists, young kids that want to be journalists, they say, "Hey, I want to be an MMA writer." And you're 19, 20 years old and that's what you want to do now, but maybe your interests change, or maybe opportunity changes, right? And if you get a chance to be an NFL writer, or a golf writer, who knows what the sport would be. When I started writing, I started when I was still in college. It was what, 15 years until the UFC was even created. you
Man,
know and so I was working for a long time before there was even such a thing as UFC. And then when it started, like, nobody was covering that, right? So you don't know what opportunities are going to come your way. So I think the thing is, be open-minded to what is in front of you. And so I wouldn't change anything, because everything that I did made me who I am and led to me having the career that I did.
I'm going to ask you a question I wrote down, you're such a legend and an icon to me that I'm not going to lie. I wrote down a list of questions I specifically wanted to ask you, but I'm going to go off the cuff a little bit here, Kevin. When, for one, what was the first UFC event you ever covered? And for two, you mentioned earlier about how you had to talk your boss into, allowing you to cover MMA. What was that conversation like?
Well, let's answer the second part first. That was easy. So that was my boss at Yahoo Sports, and Dave Morgan was his name, and he was such a great guy. All he wanted to do was put out the best product and reach the most people possible. And I told him, I said, "Hey, MMA has a great young demographic. It's a growing sport. It's going to be huge. We ought to cover this." And he's like, "If you think we should cover it, cover it." And so, he showed a lot of confidence in me and a lot of belief. And so that was awesome, right? Um, and what was the first part? I'm sorry, I forgot now.
What was the first UFC event that you ever
Oh,
covered?
so I was at the Las Vegas Review Journal newspaper before I went to Yahoo. This it would have been 99 or 2000, and somebody said to me, "Nevada is going to approve the unified MMA rules. So get used to UFC because you'll probably be covering it, and you might want to watch it or whatever. So I ended up going to a show in Louisiana, and I want to say it was UFC 29, might have been 28. It was either UFC 28 or 29, and I didn't write it as fight so much as like just what is this event like? Who was at the event, and what
Hmm.
is it like? And that was the first one I did. The first one that I covered as a journalist to cover the fights themselves was UFC 33, Victory in Vegas. It was supposed to be Tito Ortiz and Vitor Belfort, but Belfort got injured, so Tito fought Vladimir Matyushenko.
Dang, dude. Dang, dude.
Remember
Hmm.
him?
What were you doing at that time? I think I might have been in the fifth grade.
I was a wee lad. I think I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
That
kindergarten.
that was 2001.
Yeah,
Yep.
dude. Yeah.
7 years old.
7 years old. Yeah. More than that. Man, that's crazy.
I was drinking juice boxes.
Yeah, little hugs, juice boxes, dude. All right. So let me ask you this. What have been your top three favorite events that you've attended?
You know, I think it's where the fights that I would say are the ones where the main event was so really good. It's not necessarily the entire card, but the build up on so many of these fights is the main event. And so I think the main event is are ones that that really stand out. And so, I think the Tyson Holyfield bite fight has to be on that list
Yeah.
because even though it wasn't that great of a fight, it was a 2.5 round fight that ended with one guy biting the other guy. There was so much nuttiness that happened that I think that has to be on my list. UFC was a 167, Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald. Just an incredible main event. Those guys went at it like you would not believe, and you just kept saying like, how are these guys standing up? How are these guys going to finish? And that was one. And then and I want to say UFC 53, and it was for a moment. Matt Hughes was the UFC welterweight champion,
Yes, sir.
and he had a number of defenses, and he was fighting Frank Trigg in a rematch, and they were big rivals. And Trigg inadvertently hit him low, but the referee didn't see it, and it looked like Trigg is going to finish him and win the championship. And Trigg, who's now a referee in California and a really good guy, I might add. But he was hated by the fans, and Matt Hughes was beloved by the fans.
Oh,
So the
yeah.
place is going crazy because they missed a foul, and it looks like Trigg is going to win the belt. Well, if you know anything about Matt Hughes when he was fighting, the number one thing people would say was how incredibly strong he was.
Yes.
And he gets up off the ground. He picks up Trigg on his shoulders like a sack of potato. He carries him across the octagon, and he slams him, and he slammed him right in front of me. Just like boom, and he went down. And the noise in that venue was unbelievable. It was like, holy crap. People were so into that. And that is always stuck in my mind just because of the title's going to change hands here, and the villain is going to win the title because of a foul that wasn't seen. And now the good guy comes back and gets I mean, it was just perfect.
A lot of drama behind that. Yeah, my aunts couldn't stand Matt. Well, no, I take that back. They couldn't stand GSP because they loved Matt Hughes so much.
Yeah.
They loved Matt Hughes so much. And me and my cousin TJ, we were, I can't remember, I think we were at my Aunt Tammy's house when they fought. And we've been telling them all week, like, do you guys know who this George St. Pierre guy? Oh, Matt's gonna, and we were like, yeah, you freaking might, but I'm just saying, dude, you're talking about someone that this is going to be a big deal. We were telling them, we were like, look, in 20 years, this is going to be a big deal. And boy, were we not even kidding.
Yeah, no, George. I mean, you can make an argument. I don't agree with it, but you can make an argument that George is the greatest MMA fighter of all time. He's in the, I don't think he is the number one guy. I think that's John Jones. but
Okay.
certainly George is in the conversation.
Okay. No, that's valid actually. That's very valid. So you think John Jones is the greatest of all time? I like to think, all right, I like to think that he 100% is. Who is your, some people don't talk about a lot is who would you put as like the runner up? Because you got like Demetrius Johnson, you've got George St. Pierre, you've got Anderson Silva. You know, people like to throw Khabib in there, but I don't, he's almost, if he'd have just fought a few more times, I feel like 110% you could throw him in there. Who's your top three greatest of all times?
I mean, I think George has to be number two, right? I mean, how many times he defended the title, then he
Yeah,
went up after being think about it, he was retired for 4 years.
and then
And
yeah,
he doesn't take a tune-up fight. He just goes
no,
up from 170 to 185 and he wins the title and he finishes the champion. And people might say it's Michael Bisping, and they say that to demean Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping is a hell of a fighter who's in the
yes,
UFC Hall of Fame and won a lot of really big fights against a lot of really good fighters.
yes,
Bisping wasn't the greatest opponent, but I mean, given the circumstances, it was a hell of a win for George. So I think you look at it and you have to put him there. Um, After that it gets a little crowded. Demetrius has to be in that. He made all those title defenses for so long. I think Habib has to be in there. The argument against Habib is, yeah, he was 29-0, but he only had X number of UFC fights, and then he didn't have a lot of the huge, UFC title fights. He retired more quickly, but look at who he did beat, right? And look at the manner in which he beat them. Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Conor McGregor. You just go down the list of people that he beat, and he beat them. It wasn't close. It was, I
mm-mm.
mean, he's talking to them as he's beating
Yeah,
them,
that
right?
Michael Johnson fight where he's
Yeah.
just mauling him and telling him, you know,
Yeah, no. So I mean, so you can make the argument that Habib is not there, but you know, I think like Anderson has to be down a little bit. He lost a few fights in there, and I know he lost when he was, but Anderson I think is definitely a top six, top seven. I just don't think that top three Anderson makes it in there.
I agree. I agree, 110%. So, I'm going to jump back into my list of questions, Kevin. We're going to let you out of here shortly, brother. We do greatly appreciate you being here, man. Um, what is the proudest feat you've ever overcome in your career?
Um, I just think making it right. When I was a
Let's
kid,
go.
every newspaper, every city had two or three newspapers. Um, and there was one person covering fighting, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be a fight writer, it was not easy. And a lot of the boxing writers, there was no MMA in those days, but the boxing writers stayed on that beat forever and ever and ever. And, I grew up a fight fan. My dad fought in the army. Um, and, it wasn't my sole goal to cover combat sports, but it was one of the sports I wanted to cover. And to be able to have made it and got in and then covered boxing over, my career, I was in for 46 years.
Hmm.
And I covered combat for a lot of that period of time, not all of it, but a lot of that. And I think, just being able to advance for so long. And like, who did I see in person in boxing? So when I was a kid, now I don't really remember it. I was 5 or 6 years old, but Sugar Ray Robinson's final fight was in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And my dad and I went to the show. And he told my mom he was taking me because it was my birthday. It's like dad wanted to go to the fight, so that was a good
Yeah.
excuse to say. But so I saw in person Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Pernell Whitaker, Oscar De La Hoya, and Floyd Mayweather. You know,
Hmm.
and you talk about the greatest welterweights who ever lived, then that's probably them. And I saw all those guys in person.
100%, dude. 100%. Good God.
That's a heck of a list.
That is like the best list.
Hmm.
Kevin, let me ask you, we're going to jump to this is going to be my probably final question. We just entered the Paramount Plus era here in North America. I'm sure you watched that event.
Yep.
What takeaways what'd you take away from that event as far as what would you like to see different in production, if anything at all? And what was your favorite fight on that card, sir?
Well, the main event was, Patty and Justin was just,
Yes, sir.
it wasn't like the most skilled technical fight, but it was just like a slobber knocker, as Jim Ross
Yes.
used to call him, right? And they got in there. And so, you have to say that, Pimblett's way to win that fight is to take Gaethje down and try to submit him. And he's out there, taking shots and giving shots. So, that fight, I think this is a great era for fans because now you find all the fights in one place. Look at the numbers, UFC put out. I think there was, 6 million concurrent streams, meaning at one more than 6 million people streaming it at one time. And
Yes.
I saw there was a report today. I'm retired, so I'm not confirming this stuff, but I read it where it said Paramount got 1 million subscribers on Saturday, the day of the fight.
Woo!
And so that, that shows you, like ESPN I thought when they went to ESPN, it was going to be great. And in a lot of ways it was, but ESPN screwed them they raised the price every year significantly. It was
Yes.
$80 at the end, right?
Yes.
And ESPN never had a good app. And so it was
Yep.
always difficult to use. People had trouble. And, I felt like that. So now you go to the Paramount era, the broadcast is the same because it's being produced by Dana White and the same announcers and the same people in the truck are all doing it. So nothing has changed. They just put a different label on the microphone. But, the distribution and what Paramount does to promote it, I think are going to be the key things.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well said. Well, so I actually called that we did a fight picks the week before, and you asked this guy right here, man. I called that Patty and Justin fight to a T.
I thought Patty was going to win, to be honest with you, but
Yeah.
it was a hell of a show.
Yeah, this guy right here thought Patty was going to win, and my brain I was so torn on this. And I worked a 12-hour shift, and I drove over here, and for weeks I was Patty, Patty, Patty. In between the hour and a half drive from my house to his house, I changed my mind, and then it pretty much just said exactly how that fight was going to go down. Minus, I said I thought Justin was going to finish him with a left hook, but obviously he knocked him down a bunch, but he didn't get the finish. Patty showed some real toughness in that fight, and that was, as you said, a slobber knocker.
I think he needs to take some time off, right? The key
Yes,
for
sir.
guys, you get in a fight like that, you can only take so many fights like that and then you're done, right? The body is not built so he has to take a while and say, I'm going to take a long rest and not come back and let my body heal. And if he does that, I think he'll be fine. If he tries to come back too soon, it's going to be tough.
He might look like Tony Ferguson.
Yes.
Yeah. Also,
Good point.
Also a legend. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I do agree.
No respect against Tony Ferguson. What I mean is what
Yeah.
Justin did to Tony Ferguson.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Well,
Tony was a great fighter for a long time, but in all of his fights, he was taking punishment as well as giving punishment, right? That's part of why you liked him so much, because if you don't think of the human side and what's actually happening to the people inside the ring, and you see this guy get knocked down, that guy get knocked down, this guy get kicked in the head, this guy get elbowed in the face, you're going, oh, and you're screaming and everything. That's what made Tony fights, great. But then when you think, back on it, like, Tony took a lot of abuse for a long time, and then the Justin Gaethje fight, like Taylor said, just kind of pushed him over the edge.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, real quick before we get you out of here, brother. Who do you got in this upcoming week's main event?
I like Volkanovski. I think, Diego Lopez, fought really well against him the last time. Could I see Lopez winning the fight? Yes, but I think, there's a good chance this could be Volkanovski's last fight, win or lose. And he's fighting in Australia at home, as the champion again. And I think he has a lot of motivation to win this fight. And I think my number one prediction is going to be it's going to be a better fight than Pimblett versus Gaethje.
Yes,
Um, but if I was forced to pick a side, I would say Volk.
man.
Well said.
Well said. Well, Kevin, this has been an absolute honor. More than just, man, we greatly appreciate this. And if I could reach through that screen and shake your hand, sir, I would. Thank you so much for being here, sir. You're such a legend and icon to both of us.
Well, thank you for the time and for talking to me and for doing combat sports, because we need more people out there loving combat sports and talking about it.
Yes, sir. Well, listen, brother, you take care. And hey, go get some time on the golf course, brother.
You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Let's go. Kevin Iole, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
Thank you, sir.